Hello. Would you like to do the intro this time?
I would love to. Welcome to Two Wizards and a Mic. And I am Andrew, and this is Shane. And we talk about things. We have a conversation. There's no cheese. We just sit back and have a conversation. There's no formula. And today we're going to start talking about races in D&D, which
That's
are
right.
not actually races. It's a
That's
poor
true.
choice of a word, but it's a word from the beginning of D&D. And actually, the different species that you can be in the game, we're going to begin with the human and the elf and versions of the elf. And so we'll talk about both of those tonight.
Yes, we shall. And don't forget, today's episode is, of course, sponsored by Cawood Publishing, a maker of fine books everywhere or stuff. You can buy them. Just search for them. It'd be great. Um, Actually, I have a funny story about the whole race thing. About when I first started playing D&D as a kid,
Mm-hmm.
and it was I always because I don't know if this was because of the people I played with. Like, I don't remember off the top of my head if you could actually have uh it was like the half elf, but I had a yeah, I guess it always has been that way. Now I've said it out loud, I'm like, yeah, it's kind of been that way. A half tiefling maybe. I have. But anyway, every character I played was always a half elf, like every single time. Because I wanted to be able to be a fighter, but also be able to cast spells and things like that.
Right.
And it was always my default go to. As an adult, it's like you kind of want to get more creative and actually choose. It's like, oh, it'd be interesting if I could, it's like in Skyrim, certain different species will be able to resist certain things or have
Yeah.
vulnerabilities to certain things. And humans, of course, are always kind of that sort of middle ground where they have their own sort of bonuses and that sort of thing. But did you play any? What was your favorite species back in the day, like when you first started playing?
Well, I mentioned the other one of our other episodes that I started with the incredibly creative choice. I went with a human neutral fighter.
Every single
And
time,
sorry.
every character was a human, was
Yeah.
neutral and a fighter.
Well, I actually because I didn't I started DMing pretty soon. So, but when I first started playing for, several months for sure, I was the human Talon fighter. And yeah, at the beginning it was quite simple. And I think, we can start talking about humans quickly because I think it's fairly straightforward. Um, and again, it is funny, I think, in the new player's handbook that it goes on and on about humans, where in first edition there's just a really short little, a few sentences that you're human, we're humans. You could probably figure it out.
Exactly,
Um,
exactly.
so we have a lot of famous human heroes. Obviously, the Lord of the Rings ones come to mind, like Aragorn, um, even Gandalf. Although Gandalf is not actually human, he's in a human form. He's actually sort of an angel creature, um, incredibly powerful. He doesn't actually show all his powers in the story. Then, of course, you have Star Wars with Luke and Han Solo and Princess Leia, um, Obi-Wan Kenobi, and then, of course, Indiana Jones from that same sort of time period.
Yeah.
More recently, like Malcolm Reynolds from Firefly, who I think is quite similar to Han Solo, although I think it's different because he was a soldier. I think he might even have been an officer in the military.
Yeah.
I think that's right. Right? Wasn't he an officer,
Yeah, he was. I think he was a
a
captain. Yeah,
captain?
which
Yeah,
hence why he became one. Yeah.
yeah, exactly. So, but I think he's pretty similar to Han Solo, that archetype. Um, And then you've got Harry Dresden from the Dresden series, which is quite similar to D&D, about a wizard in our time. Of course, Conan, real old school hero. You've got Buffy, Lara Croft, Robin Hood, again going back in folklore. Even Ripley from Alien. Some of my favorite world building ever is in the Alien series, especially at the beginning. And then we've got Neo, a kind of a new modern science fiction type hero. all of those are many kinds of they incorporate many kinds of archetypes in the human heroes.
Yeah.
And my favorites definitely would be um, Aragorn, Obi-Wan, those warriors who um, who are the heroic warrior, basically, who will the kind of patient warrior too. You know,
Yeah. Yeah.
the one who won't use their sword unless they need to use their sword or their lightsaber.
One of the cool things about the list that you put together, like of these particular types of characters,
Hmm.
is it reminds me of all of those. What alignment do you want to be? And there's ones for Star Wars, and there's ones for Firefly, and there's ones for Star Trek, and all
Yeah.
those kinds of things. And I always find those helpful because if you know that style of character, uh, those are just kind of little reminders about, oh yeah, that kind of character. Okay, he's represented as being like neutral good. Okay, well that's a character I want to actually have. And if you want to be a rogue, you can look up all kinds of there's all kinds of fantasy things where they break them down into those kinds of
Hmm.
D&D sort of categories. And I always find it really helpful to kind of go, what kind of character do I want to play? What kind of alignment should I be? And it actually helps you kind of go, oh yeah, that would actually work for an elf, or that would actually work for a human, or that would work for whatever other species you pick.
Yeah.
And it's kind of cool that way because I think people forget, at least I do, every once in a while. I catch myself kind of not realizing that choosing a human over an elf, it could have benefits for the adventure that in theory I'm going to be going on,
Yes.
especially if your character has died and you have to pick a new one. It's like, I died to this. Oh, but if I was a human, I might have actually resisted that better. So those
Hmm.
kinds of decisions can come into play, at least for me.
Yeah, it's a good point. I mean, I think that's why alignment, the idea of taking alignment out of the game, for me, doesn't really make much sense because it is tying into pure archetypes that are in our world and in our storytelling that you
Yeah,
cannot get rid of. There will always be those archetypes of the hero, of the mother, of the father, of the dark knight, and that's Dark Knight in terms of light, right?
yeah,
So, and the alignments tie into those so succinctly. For example, like you say in Star Wars, very clearly, I think Luke is lawful good and Han is chaotic good.
yeah.
That's the difference right there. And I'd say probably Lando is chaotic neutral. He's, I think, a good example of chaotic neutral. Lawful neutral is a bit harder because they're not good, they're not evil, but they go by the rules, sort of regardless. Um, that's a hard one. Like I think Captain Kirk again. Captain Kirk is probably chaotic good.
Yeah,
Um, Indiana Jones probably chaotic good too. I would say
I would
it's hard
agree.
to find a lawful neutral, especially because they're not considered cool. Um, yeah, I wouldn't say any of those are lawful neutral that I could think of. Um, yeah,
Well, let's
there's
see.
usually a lot of the chaotic ones are usually the ones that are popular.
Yeah, I mean the most popular. I mean that's the thing, right? Is that also when you have picking a character, there's also the DM might actually have rules about you can't play a certain particular type because it'll either clash with what the adventure is supposed to be about, or maybe the
Hmm.
story is about you. I played a game ages and ages ago where the goal was to actually become an angel, and you had to sort of strive to get there. And there were the little tiny. Basically, the DM would put tests in the way where
Hmm.
if your character didn't, you know, embody the sort of angelic kind of decisions that
Hmm.
you would eventually I think what did we have? I think we got thrown into like like a subplane of quicksand or something. There was some sort of thing where you
Hmm.
had to try to escape from, and that was kind of cool. But I think sort of lawful. It was lawful neutral or lawful
Hmm.
good. You were thinking of just a moment ago.
Lawful neutral is a harder one to peg, especially in terms of pop culture or adventures, because
I would kind
lawful
of
neutral
go,
wouldn't necessarily they don't go against the grain, right? And
yeah. the
So
lawful neutrals I've seen usually feature Aunt Beru in Star Wars world or Uncle Owen as being like the we're playing by the rules. Yeah, we're staying
yeah,
out of it. If you want to talk
yeah,
about
that's a
it, we'll
good.
talk about it. But
Yeah, those are good examples. That's true. Yeah, that's right. Yeah. Um, so so yeah, humans, lots of choices. Do you have a favorite hero out of from that list or from another list or?
well I do, as a matter of fact. I mean, my favorites would definitely be like, let's say the top five would be Han Solo, Indiana Jones, uh, Captain Kirk. Yeah, you always have to
Hmm.
have Kirk. Um, Malcolm Reynolds. I mean, it also depends if I decide to be a human character. Then that goes into uh, what sort of class you want to be, and so if I wanted to have like a barbarian character, I might decide, hey, I want to be like, I want to create Conan.
Hmm.
And I remember every so often I've looked up like, what is a character sheet for Conan, and then you see like hundreds of them out there where they've kind of taken, okay, well, what's Conan like, and here's all the things, here's his stats. So definitely of those five, if I wanted to be like the Firefly Adventure, or sorry, not
Hmm.
the Dragonfly Adventure,
Oh yeah, yeah.
um, that kind of Malcolm Reynolds character, I could totally build a sheet on that one. And but then there's all of the other characters. Like, what kind of would this person be a different species? Would this person be? I mean, it kind of gets all very cool. But definitely, out of all of them, I would say Captain Kirk would be the number one in
Hmm.
my sort of favorite list.
Hmm. Yeah, he's a big favorite of mine, and I think I say again Aragorn and Obi-Wan because I like the monk-like qualities of
Mm.
both of them. Um, yeah, and they're both loners, Obi-Wan and Aragorn. Yeah, yeah, there's definitely a pattern there, I think. There are some similarities. Um, so in fifth edition, the features for human is that you get to add one to every single ability score, which is pretty sweet. Probably one of the reasons that it is still the most popular race to choose in D&D is the human. Um, so they're medium size, which means basically 5 feet to 7 feet, pretty much. Regular speed, they speak common plus one other language. Um, there's some variance, so you can have feats instead of your ability score improvement, which come later on. Um, and some people start with a feat as well. There's also, instead of adding two to your ability scores in ability score improvement, you could choose to have one on one ability and another ability. And you can also choose to have a skill every ability score improvement instead of the points for your scores. Um, Pros and cons, I'd say, well, humans, again, they're pretty relatable because we're human. And they're straightforward in terms of an overall kind of, because we know them well. I think because, again, of their shorter lifetimes, they're considered to be quite, their attempt to be quite prolific and productive because they don't have all those years like gnomes and dwarves and elves to live their lives. What do you
No,
think
that's
in
true.
terms of pros and cons for a human character?
Um, I think of I would say, well, I mean, the pros right off the bat are the ability scores. Like day one, you start the character and it's suddenly, oh, all right, so I'm a little more
Yeah.
powerful without right out of the gate. Um, I think primarily the con I always come up with is, as a player, you kind of want to get away from being yourself, and so I kind
Hmm.
of once in a while I kind of think of, "Oh, I can't be a human because I'm a human all day long, so why would I bother?" Um, but I think that kind of leaves a few cards on the table depending on your perspective of what sort of species you want to be. Um, and that would be, I mean, other than that, I can't think of any other cons other than just trying to be creative with playing in a role playing game.
Right.
Um, they're not particularly they're I mean,
Flashy.
it's kind of like they're neutral. They're in the middle of the road because then you have
Yeah.
other species to one side who are going to be stronger. They might have better abilities for spell casting as they level up, and then vice versa. You're going to have other characters that, I mean, the one thing that actually that you play very well in your games is if you're a particular species that is not native to that area,
Hmm.
you actually have the NPCs go, "Hey everyone, how's it? Whoa, what is this thing?" You know, because they've never probably seen it before, and that
Hmm.
kind of stuff. So, I mean, things like Goliaths are human-like, even though they're sizable,
Right.
but I don't think they'd be as scary as, say, I don't know, a Dragonborn, where there's been never a Dragonborn ever.
Yeah.
So yeah, did I say Dragonborn? What did I actually mean? Is that what they're called? Is my Skyrim knowledge sort of
No, no,
seeping
there
into
are
my D&D?
Dragonborn in fifth edition. Yeah,
But
I think
yeah,
that.
but yeah, those kinds of things.
Yeah, I think that's a good point. It does. I think it pushes you to be a little more creative with your role playing if you are playing a human. I think sometimes
Yeah.
because you're like, let's do something interesting because it doesn't have the flash of some of the other races. Um, so far, I've played a human monk very briefly, and he was like somebody who would sacrifice everything for the party and the greater good. Again, a kind of like Obi-Wan Aragorn character. And then I played a rogue who was quite different, who had a lot of attitude, and I really enjoy playing the rogue. Like I think if you play a rogue well, you can last a long time because you can deal a lot of damage and you can get out of the way of trouble. You can get out of the you can move around in the combat really well to get out of trouble. Yeah, I think rogues are one of the better classes for those people who like maxing out their abilities and their features and everything.
Well, especially when you have that the ability to what's it called? The I've actually don't think I've ever played a rogue, or at least I haven't played one recently. The secondary attack, the backstab
Sneak
thing. What's it?
attack.
Sneak attack.
Oh yeah,
Sneak
it's
attack's
huge.
incredibly powerful. Like I think when you've played it, but when some other people we've played with have done it, uh, a lot of the time it's like, okay, and I'm gonna do a sneak attack, 700 damage. Okay, we've killed off that character, like
Yeah.
completely out of nowhere. It's like,
Oh yeah, and with it,
ha!
you can do it at range too. Like it's yeah, I think you can do it. You can do it at range. It's pretty amazing. Yeah, you haven't played actually that many humans in our have you played any humans in our campaigns? Oh,
Uh,
Raven was a human.
Raven was a human.
He was
Actually, I
kind of
think
a
you're right. I think that's
Conan
the only
like
human I've
character.
actually done. Yeah, he was very much like a Conan,
Yeah.
you know, the black sort of flowing hair kind of thing.
Yes.
And he and
Maybe
he
maybe
died.
more
He died
Fabio.
like a chump.
Yeah. He got killed by goblins, if I remember.
Yeah, we were like in a forest trying to. I think we were traversing a log. There was some sort of
Yeah.
log involved, and yeah,
Yeah,
then
you got
suddenly we were
ambushed
getting
by a
thumped.
whole horde of goblins and he went down. Wasn't he more Fabio than
It was
Conan?
like Fab. Yeah, actually, yeah. Well,
Yeah,
that's what I mean by that sort of flowing hair. But Fabio definitely,
right.
because he was a pretty boy. And I'm kind of happy he died early because it's like, he's a wimp.
Yeah.
But yeah, those kinds of things. I mean, it forces you to, if you decide to play human. I think that for me is definitely it. It's that con of you're human all day and you're kind of playing a human in the game, but the other half of it is you really are going to be challenged to make it unique and to actually have that sort of life to that character without just kind of brushing it off. I always find that people assume that you're a human in these games a lot of the time, and but you're right. I haven't played that many, so maybe I
No.
should play a few more because I do often forget about the ability scores like right at the beginning. So
Right. Yeah.
um, yeah,
All right. So humans, pretty straightforward, I think. Lots of choice, obviously. Elves. So a very iconic part of Dungeons and Dragons and fantasy. And a lot of people don't understand that elves actually began not with Lord of the Rings and The Hobbit and Tolkien, but way back in Europe. And they were not these humanoid elves that were fairly tall and had civilizations and had bows. And um, they actually were more like house elves or dark versions of house elves in Harry
yeah,
Potter. That's what the elves were, and more like very fairy, more like fairies, right? So elves have really changed
exactly.
over the yeah, elves have changed over the years. Classic elves include the more modern versions of Legolas, Galadriel, Elrond, Arwen, Thranduil, all from Tolkien. Um, my favorite definitely is Galadriel, and again, I notice a pattern of me liking the kind of more monk-like solitary. I have a feeling actually that introverts like elves quite a lot.
I would agree. I mean, my favorite elf of all time would be, um, oh my lord, what's his name? The lead half elf in Dragonlance. Oh, good lord, what is
Oh,
his
is
name?
it Tanis? I think
Tanis,
Tanis, right? Yeah,
Tanis half heaven. Yeah,
yeah.
that was sort of my. I mean, I played elves before, but I never, as a kid, you don't quite get the nuances of different sort of species and races and things like that a lot of the time. So but when I started reading those novels and then started playing the modules that sort of stemmed off from those, that definitely made me think about, oh well, he's a half elf. Oh, I'm going back to being a half elf. It's great in a different universe. Yay. But it always stuck with me. Like every time I think of elves, I either think of Lord of the Rings
Hmm.
or I think of Dragonlance, just because
Hmm.
they were somewhat unique in that, like, he was that sort of, I seem to recall he was like the bastard child, and they weren't necessarily well thought of, and then you had the elves of that world that were very much that sort of high elf kind of thing,
Yeah,
and yeah,
the
actually you
Colin
actually have it.
Esty. Yeah,
Yeah. I was gonna say I just saw the word there. I'm like, yeah, that's
yeah,
them there.
yeah.
But yeah, they definitely had um, the writers of that particular storyline definitely spent a bit of time going, okay, well, we're gonna write another fantasy novel series. We got to make it different because it's just going
Hmm.
to be the same thing again. And they did. I think they did a reputable job for keeping it, familiar but not entirely uh, the same. If was the
Yeah.
right way to put
Well,
it.
yeah. I think sometimes again people forget this archetype foundation that we don't get away from. So there is an
Yeah.
archetype of an elf. And yes, you can change things and tweak things, but the archetype's still going to be there. I've heard
Yeah.
some people say, oh, you can't take Tolkien's elves and put them wherever you want. Um, yeah, I think you can, because a lot of those qualities of those elves you could have them as more of a personal thing. It doesn't have to be so public. Um, their beliefs and that sort of thing. You could change that easily. And many people have been playing for years and years in Dungeons and Dragons with elves and enjoying it in many different kinds of worlds. So,
Yeah.
um, so let's look. We'll just break down a whole bunch of elf categories quickly here. So, high elves basically, there's two kinds of high elves. There are the kind that are more distant, aloof, more Tolkien elves. Um, and then you've got the more sociable ones that are really connected into the world deeply. So the high elves in Forgotten Realms would be the moon elves, the Qualinesti we just talked about in Dragonlance, um, the gray elves and the valley elves in Greyhawk, and in our world of Mir, the silver elves. So the ones who are
Right.
more social, the social version, the ones who are more connected to other races, you would have the gray elves. Oh, sorry. Um, Let me just check here. Yeah, the you would have actually the more sociable ones would be the silver elves in our world of Mir, the Sylvanesti in Dragonlance, and the Sun elves in Forgotten Realms. Um, yeah, and actually the gray elves and valley elves and Greyhawk would be the more sociable ones. That was my mistake. Because Greyhawk is quite a diverse world with a lot of these races working together. Like, for example, in Greyhawk, some of the kingdoms have armies that are made up of elves, dwarves, gnomes, halflings all together working together. Sort of
Yep.
like exactly like the dwarves and the elves in Tolkien at times. So, and then you have wood elves, and Greyhawk. That would be the wild elves and what you call wood elves. In the world of Mir, we call them forest elves, and in Dragonlance, the Kaganesti. And then you have the Drow, who I wouldn't personally use for player characters because we don't have evil characters in our campaign, but there's many different kinds of tables. Some people play Drow. The Dark Elves who live in the underworld, also known
That
as
would
the
be
Underdark.
really hard. Like I
Yeah,
always just picture a drow. Like if you were to play one as a player, uh, what would you do aside from stab, 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 stab? You've stabbed all the other people in the party. Like what's like?
yeah, and
They're
true.
supposed to be evil. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. True Drow are chaotic evil. I don't think the neutral evil works very well. I think neutral evil, they're supposed to be in fifth edition. I think chaotic evil, like they originally were, makes more sense because the underworld is kind of a sort of a disaster down there sometimes. Um, so yeah, there's Drow, and then of course half elves. And I know a lot of people in 5e play half elves because they want to have some human, but they want to see in the dark.
That, to be honest, there are a lot of times where I pick a race that has dark vision, like just because I want to. I don't screw torches, but what's really funny is that when you're playing with a bunch of people,
Mhm.
there's going to be somebody who requires a torch, and then the
Yeah,
moment they light it, it's like, oh well, I may as well just pull out a torch now too because I'm screwed.
exactly.
I can't see a darn thing.
Exactly. And it's only a certain distance, right? A lot of people will have their characters just seeing everywhere in the dark, and you can't see color and you can only see a certain distance. All right. So
It
features of all these elves is they live over 700, except for half elves. They live over up to over 700 years. They can see in the dark to a certain degree. They get a bonus to their dexterity, +2, which is really sweet. They're generally chaotic good. They're usually about 5 feet to just over 6 feet tall, and they're very slender. And they have proficiency in perception. Every elf, which is really useful. And they have advantage against being charmed or put to sleep by magic, which some people say it's a throwaway thing, but I think it's pretty useful personally.
Well, sleep
Um,
is like that sort of underdog spell is when I've sort of think about it because I think maybe in the last few years I think I've seen it used twice, maybe three times. But it's
yeah.
actually quite a useful spell. It's like if you're about to die and
Mhm.
if you have that spell on hand, like you could save everybody. But anyway, yeah.
Yeah, no, it's a really underused spell in fifth edition. People used to use it quite a bit, I think, more in the beginning of D&D. Um, so then the elves as well have a 4-hour trance instead of the 8-hour sleep for a long rest, which is very useful. They're often can be used as the sentinels while the party rests,
Yeah.
especially if you have two of them, it's ideal. Elves can speak Common and Elvish. And then the high elves and wood elves both have proficiency in long swords, short bows, and long bows, which I love because I have a favorite wizard elf character who uses a sword, which I love. Again, it's sort of a Gandalf. It's like Gandalf using a sword, but also having all this magical ability.
Right.
High elves get a bonus to intelligence. They get a wizard cantrip, which can be very useful, and they get an extra language. Um, in comparison, the wood elves get a +1 to wisdom. Their speed is a bit faster, 35 feet. So the fastest race actually of the base ones, which can be very helpful. Um, and then they have the ability to hide in natural phenomena. Um, yeah, which is I think, a big bonus. So general pros, a lot of people like the mystery and the grace of elves, the magical qualities. Um, a lot of people enjoy forest settings for adventures. It's again archetypal. The forest represents the unconscious, so you go there to sort things out. And yeah, they're very popular. What other pros can you think of in terms of the elves?
Well, I mean, the best thing I can think of for a pro for an elf is is like when I was a kid. How you could cast a lot more spells than a human would be able to, even if they were a wizard. But I think the pros that I like about these characters is that there is, especially with wood elves, you're going to be able to use the Mask of the Wild, which I've used a bit because
Mhm.
sometimes you want to have a stealth check, and it's I'm going to be even far more stealthy if we're in this particular environment. Those kinds of feats, no, they're not really feats. They're more
Features.
features. Thank you.
Yeah.
But yeah, it's basically a thing that depending on the adventure you're going in, like if you're going into a dungeon, the wood elf, for example, would have no benefit to that unless there's an
Well,
underground
except they can
forest.
move quickly.
Well, that too. I mean, that's definitely going to be a huge bonus in a lot of cases, especially when we've had characters die because other characters couldn't had like they ran out of spell slots or they had some sort of issue where they couldn't get to them.
Yeah.
And but yeah, um, but definitely I like that idea. And the thing in the note that we have for the show is that elves live in small villages. What?
I don't
You're right. That makes no
understand.
sense. I had no idea.
Yeah, I think like that makes sense for the wood elves, and they're not as plentiful usually as the high elves. And I think some high elves that would make sense. But they've just explained in the player's handbook how this is a grand race, and they have kingdoms. And if you look at the art, it's like of a big forest city. And then they say they live in small villages usually. Doesn't make sense. I think like
Lothlorien
a
is
certain
not
amount of
small.
elves, sure. Sorry?
Lothlorien is not small.
Exactly,
It's
exactly.
huge.
Exactly.
But yeah, sorry, that just makes no that just blows my mind. I have no memory of reading that in the player's handbook, but wow.
Yeah,
Um,
it's well, there are some things that are pretty funny. Like there is a new idea, and it might happen in 5.5 Dungeons and Dragons, the next edition, where they're going to detach these racial modifiers and connections in terms of the mechanics away from all the races. So, in other words, elves can't have a bonus to intelligence anymore. A high elf, a wood elf couldn't have. Maybe they couldn't even have that speed anymore. They're just going to make. They're basically trying to make all the races the same. That's what ends up happening, and saying that there shouldn't be anything connected to their race, which is actually not a race. It's just a species, and it's a made-up creature in a fantasy world.
I
And
I that surprises me that that is a thing because
yeah.
if you're an orc and you're 8 feet tall and you're built like a brick house and you punch a human who's 5'2", how I mean, unless they come up with some sort of creative way where you could in theory have a bit more of a mix and a match, maybe like, oh, I'm going to be an orc and oh, I've got this list of traits that I could choose. I mean, possibly that would work, but if they're trying to change these characters to or these I mean I like to call them species more often than races because
Mhm.
if you are a what is the species like the I can never pronounce it, the cat species, like
Oh, tabaxi?
tabaxi, I would not look at that character and be like, that is a brick house kind of character opposed to the orc or a dragonborn, you sure you could be a barbarian or something with that character, but ultimately it's a very different structure, it's a very different type of character as opposed to one that's more bulky,
Well, yeah, and then think of dwarves too, right? They get a bonus for constitution because they're very sturdily built, and they live in, difficult terrain, and they do hard work. They're miners, and they're, hiking through the mountains, and it
a
just makes
rabbit is the
it,
same as a goat, like
it just
a
doesn't make
goat on a
yeah,
mountain.
it doesn't make sense. I believe they're going to tie these things all more to classes, which again doesn't make sense. Like yeah. I mean,
I don't
after a
see them even
while,
working really
yeah,
well.
After a while, I could see how certain things could be, because of the training you had or your experience, then maybe you could get a bonus in certain things, which is basically ability score improvement. That's sort of what it's like. Um, but yeah, it's an odd choice. I don't think there's. I mean, I love elves. Most of my characters have been elves or half elves. I guess the only con is if you want to fall too much into the stereotype, not the archetype, but the stereotype of what, if you want to play Legolas every single time and you don't change him, um,
Yeah.
I guess that might be a con. Or some people might see their aloofness as a negative, where I don't really mind it.
No, neither do I. I mean, and that's the thing with like the pros and cons of some of these different characters is that the if you choose an elf versus a human, it's they're similar, but they are going to have those different traits and they're going to
Hmm.
have those kinds of things. But you could also have a human that's more aloof than the average elf.
Sure.
So you're not going to have. This is what bothers me about this idea that they want to change the way that species are dealt with, because if they are trying to cater to, I guess, making it more equal across the board, I mean, I can see that, and sure, okay, we all want to have characters that are relatively equal, but there's better ways to deal with it, and I think that uh, attacking how the stereotype part, where you pick, I mean, this is why I've picked halflings and made them barbarians,
Hmm.
because it's kind of silly, but at the same time, if you have a halfling who's just rocketing through dragonborns, just with good rolls or whatever, um, that could happen. Like I don't want to
Hmm.
play that sort of character trope, where you have like characters in Dragonlance where you have the halflings now are basically said to be, most of them are going to be some sort of rogue-like character,
Hmm.
and they're going to be somewhat crazy and they're going to do these kinds of things, but that's not really about that. you know it's just, it bothers me, but all of this bothers me because I disagree with it, because um, you may as well start ripping up literature of all kinds and all over the world, because there's going to be tropes and stereotypes and things that, I mean, that's the brilliant part about rolling a character, whether it's an elf or whether it's a human. You need to challenge yourself to try and make them unique. That, because that's kind of the point of role playing, is that you
Yes.
go, okay, I've got these characters and I'll just spice it up a bit differently and do that. I mean, the Tabaxi monk, I think we had a player in your game that did that, and that was brilliant, because it was like, oh, monks are supposed to be like these nimble kind of,
Hmm.
flurry of blows, I'm gonna punch you to death kind of characters, but you add the species traits of a Tabaxi to that, and suddenly it's like, well, yeah, of course you can jump 75 feet high. What, really? I mean, I'm exaggerating, but yeah, you
Yeah,
have these
yeah.
sorts of things that kind of benefit if you choose that species and add that class to it. But maybe you play a character, the character's got like a torn hamstring. I can't jump at all anymore. I got injured a couple of years ago, and now I have to roll every time I try and climb something. I'm at disadvantage, because players can do that. You can say, "Hey, DM,
Yeah.
my character's got this compound fracture that's never healed quite right. You know what? Can we do something in the story with that? Where suddenly, like, I have to try and overcome that, or so.
Yeah.
Anyway, cause it's
Yeah,
a
I think.
game.
Yeah, and again, it's a game, but if you stray too far from the archetype, you stray too far from some core parts of that species or race, whatever you want to call it. You just start losing definition, and you don't really have a character anymore, and
Oh,
everybody just
exactly.
becomes a furry creature who can cast spells, you know, which gets it's not a very interesting game anymore or story.
You, you heard it here first. There's a new class coming, furry.
Yeah. Imagine if like the Fellowship of the Ring was just like, nine or whatever, nine furries just meeting around that table, right? You've got
How
my tail.
boring that would
You've got
be.
my All right. So, what classes have we played ourselves as elves? Um, I have a funny story with my first elf I played in fifth edition. I came up with this great catchphrase, this great background. He was a bard, I believe, and I hadn't played in the fifth edition yet. I'd only DM'd. And first session, I played my new character. He kills the big bad evil guy near the end of the adventure, but his minions kill him, and I roll a 1 on the death
Oh.
saves to die. So that great that great character that I made now is in our Monsters of the City book. I put him in there. His name's Serious
Nice.
Moonlight, with his catchphrase, "Let's get serious." That's right. And yeah, that was something.
Uh, the first time I ever played a character that was just an elf, wasn't a half elf, was a character named Maggie. And they were a. I'm embarrassed by this, but it was a ranger that refused to wear clothing because I was trying to come up with like unique ways of having ideals and flaws and things like that. And the flaw that I picked from a homebrew table
Mhm.
was nudist. And I'm like, okay, I'm gonna roll with that. So the character basically ran around almost in the nude to try and be invisible. It was a ridiculous thing, but that was the very. It was either before that it was just the half elf, or it was the nudist elf running around in the woods. And yeah, it was. I'm
Nice.
embarrassed by that.
What you need is what happens in Skyrim. If you don't have clothes on, the NPCs start saying, "Hey, you can't walk around like that."
Did I really? I've
You
never
know?
encountered that. I had no
Oh yeah,
idea.
yeah.
Of
Because
course, I
sometimes
always
you
have
forget,
armor,
like
so
you change into armor or you sell something, and then all of a sudden you realized. Of course, you're not. Yeah. So anyway, the NPCs start going, "You can't walk around like that." I think the guards might even walk by and say that. So my other
it's kind
elf
of awesome.
character I've played in fifth edition is also kind of a goofball because he was a wood elf wizard who thought he was smarter than everyone else, and he would use maximum. He was an evocation wizard, evocation school of evocation. So he would use these massive attack spells, and then he would just sneak off. So my favorite was when we were going through this sketchy temple in the Princes of the Apocalypse, the elemental evil cults, and everything in there was evil. So there was a door nearby, and I just opened up the door, and the DM said, Jay said, "You see like 12 skeletons, I think." And I said, "I cast fireball," and I close the door and I walk away whistling. And he would do that multiple times. He would cast some major spell like lightning bolt or fireball or whatever, and then he would just take off, in every direction. And actually, that was the character I had too, the elf who could use a sword, a long sword. So that was his weapon, which was fun to have a wizard
Nice.
who had a terrible armor class, had massive attack spells, and used a sword.
This is the nice thing about any of these characters is that you forget that they're an elf. You forget that they're a human. You forget that they're all those things because if you play them long enough or you play them well enough, they are actually individuals, and it to
Oh
me it
yeah,
becomes irrelevant of where they're from.
exactly.
And it's so sad that I guess Wizards is trying to rectify a problem that I don't think exists,
Yeah.
which is really unfortunate because I hope they don't do that. I hope they don't go that direction because that is just sad. Um, Yeah.
Yeah, I think it makes for less interesting stories, less interesting characters, less interesting monsters. But the great thing is that since the game began, the company who puts out the majority of the resources for it, those are just guidelines, and every table can
True.
do whatever they want. So if you want to play more, these different species that have unique characteristics, and you want to play traditional fantasy, you can do it.
That's
We
true
always
because I
talk
mean
about
there
in our
are.
game that we play. Basically, we're playing first edition with fifth edition rules.
Yeah, exactly. And that's actually
That's what we're
it's kind of
doing.
like they want to push people away from playing their system of how they do things, but whatever. Who knows? Time will
Well, yeah,
tell.
we have lots of choice. That's yeah. There might even be a movement to like. I know they've had a movement consciously for the last few adventures to have encounters, and I'm pretty sure the entire Fey campaign they put out this year can be completely non-combat. Which for our group, we've played for almost 7 years. We play every we played probably 2 to 4 times a month over that time. We've had 2 sessions that were completely role playing because that is what happened in the story.
Yeah, exactly.
But for me, a fun story has action, and for me, a fun mashup for D&D is Lord of the Rings and Guardians of the Galaxy. Like bring in like some traditional fantasy, but then have some humor and have fun and action. And so I know there's a lot of groups that do a lot of role playing, and that's just that there's different tables, and then there can be tables that do a lot of combat as well.
Exactly. And I mean the combat stuff, if it was combat heavy, like I've played campaigns and that have been every single session is some sort of incredibly large battle that takes 3 hours to resolve. That gets a bit trying because then you're like, and I'm bored now because my character. Who cares what my character's catchphrase is if he's just busy trying to stab a dragon in the face, and the dragon's trying to eat him at the same time.
Mhm.
That kind of thing can drag. I think that just kind of creates a bit of a uh, I don't know, just it just makes a game feel long. At least in my experience, that's kind of how I feel about it. But if you have a mixture and a nice balance that way, where you're able to like look at your character, play your character, you're able to recognize that they are class X and they are species Y. What kind of cool things can come out of that? And
Mhm.
yeah, and make it interesting. That's the best part. Is
Yeah.
just making it interesting because it's like everything, if you repeat the same thing over and over again, everyone as a player or even a DM are going to be like, oh, the party wants to do this again, do they? Okay, well,
Yeah.
here's a beholder that just sort of sprung out of the ground. Let's see what happens.
Yeah. Yeah, I think you're right. I think most people want some variety, and um I know there are people who love to fight the entire night, and I don't mind it too much personally. But I still want to have a story. I still want to have some mystery. I still want to
Yeah.
have politics and relationships and shopping trips, trips to the pub.
Politics and shopping trips and
Yeah.
pub
So
crawls.
it's not that
Actually, we
different than
did
a
a pub
regular
crawl
game.
once, didn't we?
Sorry?
In one of the games that you ran, we I think it was last year. We did a pub crawl for like half of the session.
Oh, yeah.
It was like, let's go to this pub. Let's go to the next pub. Let's go to the next pub. And I've forgotten why we were doing it, but it was kind of fun actually. Once in a while, just to kind
Yeah.
of get off the beaten path.
Yeah. Yeah. And then I have to get really creative about what's on the menu for each. I have to refer to my lists I have and come up with new kinds of mead. And I have to come up with a new kind of barmaid or server or innkeeper, barkeep. So, yeah. Yeah, and then
But
as we said tonight, two of your choices for characters are humans and elves, and then we'll talk about some of the other races in the game.
definitely, and we've all, what's fascinating? We've had this conversation, and it's just gone by just like that. I was just
Yeah.
looking at the timer, going, "Oh my god, have we really been talking that long?" But but thank you for coming back. Thank everyone who has been listening and has been watching the videos. We appreciate everything that you're doing. Don't forget to do all of those social things. Talk to us online, and also subscribe and all that stuff too. Which, let's have some fun, and we'll keep talking. And thank you
Later.
again, Andrew, for coming.
Thank you.
Bye, everybody.